So did you end up buying the wrong kayak motor? That's a question we're going to answer today. We're going to talk a little bit about my fleet of kayaks, some of the pros and cons of each of them. We're also going to dive a little bit into the differences on some of these kayak motors, because right now it can be a little overwhelming. So it's been a while since I've had a chance to kind of talk about my kayak rigs. I've got 3 fully rigged kayaks now, way more than you probably need, but I thought it would be a good opportunity before the 2025 season really kicks off to go through each of these kayaks and talk a little bit about motors, because there's not a question that I get more than what motor do you run? What are the pros and cons of each, specifically the NK180 versus NK300. Now, this is going to be an updated talk because I do have a full video on that where I kind of go into the breakpoints on each and some of the more specifics on each motor. But I really wanted to touch on that at the beginning of this video before we get into each individual kayak. I've made a lot of changes to my motor setups going into 2025, and we're going to talk about those right out of the gate here. All right, so this is my newest kayak here. This is my Hobie Pro Angler 12 with the 360 drive. You don't see me use this one a ton. I've done a couple videos in it and kind of talked about it, but it doesn't really suit the river fishing style, which is mostly what I've been fishing this winter and spring. But it is the heaviest, most, I would say, like fully rigged style kayak that I own. And for that, you almost need these bigger motors. And I typically like to run the NK300 on this, but that comes with a problem. And let's talk about that problem. It's that this motor is very heavy. This is a very strong motor, but the trade-off is it has a lot of torque, a lot of higher push. That means a lot of the hardware on it needs to be upgraded. And that's one of the big changes I've made going into this season is I have drastically upgraded this hardware. So you can see here, I've actually upgraded it to the HD arm from Innovative Sportsman's with the bulletproof steering triangle. And you might be asking why I made this upgrade. Well, I'll show you. This right here is my old lift arm. I don't know how well you can tell, but that sucker is bent. That's almost a 1/4 inch bend to the right or left. Like it is swaying. This thing has taken a lot of pressure from the lifting up and down. The second problem is I have broken the steering column on this multiple times right here where the arm goes in, because all that pressure from this arm is torquing on this collar and it snaps it. So upgrading to this metal collar will solve a lot of those issues. And that's something that I think a lot of people overlook when they buy something like the NK300, is it is a very strong motor, so a lot of the hardware needs to be upgraded, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of up and down. Now, it's probably not a big issue if you fish a lot of open water and lakes, but keep in mind that the NK300, if you decide to go this route, is a fully fledged 36-volt system. It is a big motor, and it's probably not right for you. So that was a pretty powerful statement. Why is it not right for you? I think 80 to 90% of people who buy this motor buy it without thinking like, oh, is this going to fit my style of fishing? Because if you've got a big kayak, like a fully rigged Hobie, and you want to go out in the open water and you want to go fast, this is a great motor for that. It's a great motor if you want to go through weeds, because you can buy the rock guard with the weed trimmer on it. It's a great motor if you are fishing out in the ocean and you have to go over some big swells and you need that torque. But if you're fishing small lakes, ponds, rivers, and you're not going upstream in a river, the NK180 is probably just a better choice, because I think you can run it a little bit shallower. You can buy a lighter battery for it because it's only 24 volt. It's just overall a more versatile package. Now, I'm not dissing on this. I'll be using this when I go down to Texas in a few weeks, just because, you know, on a fully rigged kayak, it makes a lot of sense, especially in open water. But I think a lot of people see it, they are like, oh, it's the strongest motor, they go for it, then they don't realize that it is a heavy motor. You're gonna have to upgrade the hardware. You're gonna have to buy a big, expensive battery. So it doesn't make a lot of sense if you've never owned a motor to instantly go for this without really thinking about things other than just pure power, speed, and whatnot. Because the weight is a big issue. It puts a lot of tension on that up down, it puts a lot of tension on your steering. So that's why you don't see me use this a ton. I do use it, but it's just not my typical go-to. I do want to point out the 36 volt batteries are a lot heavier. They're a lot more expensive, but they are way more efficient. So if you're going to be doing a lot of running and you need to go there fast, go with this. Go with the 36 volt battery, but think about whether or not these tolerances are going to be a hindrance to you. So that's this motor. Let's talk about the 180. Then we're gonna walk through each individual kayak. I'm gonna talk about some of the upgrades I'm currently working on, as well as some of the things I've already done. All right, we're over here with my bread and butter, the Crescent Shoalie. And this is where this NK180 lives, man. It is just constantly on this. It is great because it is super light. Look at that. I'm barely pulling this and it's just up and down. You can't do that with the 300. You gotta put some force behind it. You almost need to have pulleys installed. But this is my original generation NK180. And anytime anybody asks me whether or not they should get a 300 or a 180, I'm always going to tell you this. Because you have to ask the question, you probably aren't ready for a 300. You'll know if you need a 300. If you're going up super swift river and pinch points that isn't super shallow, if you're needing to make big runs, you're gonna want the 300. You're gonna know that you already need it. You need that power to get the job done. But if you just want an efficient motor that's going to get you to where you need to be, that's gonna be cheap because it's a 24 volt system. You could put two 12 volt lithiums together and power this bad boy. This is my favorite motor that I've ever owned. This is a Generation 1. It has seen some stuff, guys. Look at that. It has seen some stuff. It can run super shallow. It can do anything that you want it to do. And it is still fast. In the river, going downstream, I still get 6.5 miles per hour. Going upstream, not so much. It's much better to have that. But the problem is you can't run that NK300 super shallow going upstream. So if you fish rivers like me that are rocky, shallow, and can be swift at pinch points, you kind of find yourself in a dilemma. So this is my Shoalie. This lives on the Shoalie. I do put the 300 on here from time to time, but for the most part, the NK180 does 90% of the things I need it to do for fishing. I would say the 300 tends to be what I use in tournaments, or if I need to go all day, or if I need to make like a big run, something like that. So these two kayaks here typically do run my 300, the Hobie and the CK2, and then the 180 tends to live on the Shoalie. I very rarely put it on the other ones. That in a nutshell is kind of the ins and outs of this. I do want to point out that the great thing about the NK180 is that you can run these light batteries. This is a 25 amp hour, 24 volt. This is my unicorn battery. You've seen me talk about it a billion times. But this sucker is light. I'm talking super light, one finger light. And this will get you all day if you're not like being ridiculous about your power usage. And these 24 volt batteries are ridiculously efficient. You know, the tolerances on the 36 volt batteries are even more efficient, but like I said, it's a lot heavier and you have to really watch your percentages a lot more on the 36. You can get a lot more efficiency out of the 36 if you're smart about it, right? Like you could go 4 miles an hour a lot more efficient in that than you could with a 24 volt system. Essentially, you've got more power, so it doesn't take as much to get to that speed. So that is one advantage of the 36 volt system is you're just gonna a lot more efficiency out of it in terms of range, but it doesn't mean that you can't get the same range out of this. You won't get there as fast though. So that's the motors. I don't really use the XI3 anymore. Especially because they don't make it anymore. I just don't find myself ever wanting spot lock because I feel like when you get really good with the foot steering on the NKs, you know, the stern mounted motors, it's really easy to stay in those positions you want to be on. Spot lock is great, don't get me wrong, but you know, power poles obviously help. A lot of people use anchor wizards on the river. I don't ever use those sorts of things, but you know, in a nutshell, you can pretty much get 90% of what you want done with the stern mounted motor. But if you're gonna be doing a lot of live scoping and big water, I could see somebody wanting an XI3. It's just, I haven't really used mine much in the last couple months. So let's go look at some of the kayaks and I'll talk about some of the changes I've made to each of them and where they fit into my 2025 strategy. Okay, like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is the Hobie Pro Angler. I have a video going in depth on some of the initial rigging I made of this. And we're making some big changes to this kayak. Specifically, I'm adding in foot controlled steering. That's currently why it's up on the stilts. And I'm gonna be mounting it right here. I'm still working on the ins and outs of it so that I can run the 300. The 300 you can't really steer with the rudder. So I've ran the 180 on this and you're able to steer with the rudder because it's not as torquey. It's not a word, not as powerful. So you can still steer with the built-in Hobie rudder. But with the 300, it just gets overpowered and you have like no pivot room. So I'm adding foot controlled steering on the Hobie. The Hobie probably won't be a big fixture in my content this year. I will be taking it with me to Lake Fork in a few weeks, mostly because I do have concerns about the wind. My preference is to hopefully fish out of the Shoalie in some shallow areas around docks and stuff like that. Just because it's nimble, you can get into places, but if the wind does pick up, I'm gonna be really glad to have this on the back burner to hit some of those higher wind areas without the fear of taking a lot of water in. You know, the Hobie is designed for big water. A lot of people take these out in the ocean, so that's where this is gonna fit in for me. Pedal drive obviously helps a lot. It's like having a second motor essentially, because you can stay in position, especially with a 360 drive. That thing has blown me away how nice that is. I know Hobie gets a lot of flack. They've had some quality issues, but the 360 drive is a super nice quality of life change, so I do appreciate that. Hobie hasn't really gotten a lot of use for me. I'm working on some changes for it, but that is where the Hobie fits in for this year. It's gonna be purely a NK300 play when I run a motor on it, or even just a pedal drive. I might take this to like local lakes and stuff with pedal drives. I do have a spot for the live scope transducer right here, which I've had on this before, but it's currently on some of my river kayaks, which is what we're gonna jump to next, the Shoalie, the star attraction.
Dude, I have like 3 bars, what the heck?
All right, so if you've ever watched any of my content, I've got more hours in this kayak than any kayak I've ever owned. It is a mess right now, and I wanted to leave it as a mess so you guys could kind of see what it looks like on the regular. So I'm gonna walk through rapid fire some of the things that I have on this right now, and some of the things that I'm gonna show you are just removable. So for starters, I do have the Boonedox Bar on this. This graph right here is kind of plug and play to where I can put it on there on this Boonedox console bar, and I can put this on any kayak. So at any point do I decide that, hey, I don't want to take live scope on the Shoalie, I just pop this off with the graph, and I'm able to go simply bare bones. And this is plug and play for all 3 kayaks. CK2, which we'll look at in a second, Hobie, plug and play. Sit it on there, run the cables through, and you're on the water. I can swap these out in less than 10 minutes for each of my kayaks. So that's a really big advantage to this style of bar because, like I said, it is interchangeable between all 3 kayaks, and I have them set up to run this bar flawlessly. So that is a huge quality of life change for me, but my live scope rig in particular, I'm obviously not a huge electronics guy. I've been running it on the river, but I just keep my live scope in this movable tray. So that's the black box with the transducer and the arm. That comes in and out. Like I can sit it in here, I can sit it in the Hobie, and all I have to do is run the wires through here with a quick screw change, and I don't have any wires laying anywhere. Same thing with the Hobie. CK2 is a little different because it's open platform, but if I do want to run electronics or live scope on this, it's really plug and play. Now let's move towards the back of the kayak. I've got my throttle mounted here. I like to control it with my left hand. Sometimes you'll see me use my feet. Kayak cushion is a must, but I also have the foot controlled steering. You can see all the mud in there. This is actually getting an upgrade very soon, so ignore the mess there. So on the back part here, I've got the Boonedox landing gear, which acts as a platform for your black pack. So because the Boonedox landing gear takes up that area, they designed a specific bar so your black pack can actually sit on top of that. One cool thing about that is I actually have my GoPro mount here. So I stick that pole in here and I get that really top wide angle view that you guys are used to, which is very cool. But you don't lose as much storage as you would think. Yeah, you lose the tank well, but you also gain underneath this, you have storage. So you can stick a lot of stuff under there, like bags of baits. You could even put like a low pro battery. The new Newport low pros would slide right up under there. So that is one advantage of having the Boonedox on there, but the Boonedox is great because it makes the movement super easy. You can move your kayaks up and around a lot easier with the Boonedox on there, especially if you're truck bed loading with like a T-bone. You roll it up to the truck, you lift the end on the wheels, you slide it in, you pop the wheels off, and you're good to go. Now, one big change I've made on my NK180 is I actually installed the dugout bait and tackle steering triangle, which gives you a lot more pivot range. This makes this kayak able to turn on an absolute dime. This is awesome because it does give you that wider steering. So that means when you pull, you get a lot more precise movements. So super cool upgrade. Not necessary though. Like I said, this is such a light motor. I've never had any issues with any of the default equipment. And I have run this through some pretty crazy stuff. All right, let's talk about my big kayak, the Crescent CK2. It's the tandem kayak that's converted into a fishing platform by Crescent. Now, admittedly, I don't use this kayak a ton, but it does fit in a couple scenarios for me, specifically if I want to go really fast. This is a 7+ mile-an-hour kayak with the NK300. This is the type of kayak where it was built for that bigger motor. It was built to handle a heavy draw. This can have a load up to 800 pounds with the scuppers in, 750 without them out, and it cuts through waves really well. So if you're gonna be fishing a lot of choppy water, but you wanna have a bigger platform, this is a great kayak for that. I actually fished Guntersville in this kayak with the NK300, with the weed guard, and I was zooming to my spots, catching frogfish, standing up, and that's the beauty of this kayak is you can stand pretty freaking easy in it, and you can walk up and down this kayak on the water. This is also where I typically run the XI3. I have run the XI3 quite a bit on this kayak. I don't really run it on the Shoalie anymore, but if I'm wanting to do like live scoping and stuff like that, the XI3 and the Crescent CK2 is a great option for that. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time talking about that. That's kind of the CK2 in a nutshell. This is my big fast kayak if I wanna take a lot of stuff and go really fast. It's a great river kayak too for that sort of thing. So if you want a bigger like camping style kayak where you can get a lot of stuff in both the front and the back, awesome kayak for that. You can cover a lot of water. It paddles really well for a bigger kayak because it does have that bulbous nose. Whereas this bad boy, the Shoalie, you can do just about anything in that. So it's almost like they complement each other really well in the sense that this is going to be your like super nimble, skinny water stuff. Can't get as much payload in there. I mean, it does have an open hole, which helps you kind of shove some stuff in there. But for the most part, this is your nimble, throw and go wherever you want. You can even take it on big water. I've taken it in some pretty crazy chop in the past, whereas this bad boy is like an offshore machine, especially if you combo it with the XI3. The one thing that I will say is you can put the 300 on this and the XI3 and have two motors. And I have a video with a walkthrough on the CK2 showing off the two motors. Super great watch if you're curious about a more in-depth look at that kayak. So that's my kayak fleet for 2025. It might change. There's a couple things coming down the pipe that you guys might be interested in. But for the most part, I'm going into 2025 fishing out of the Shoalie and probably a little bit out of the Pro Angler. Now it won't be a lot. Obviously I work very closely with Crescent from time to time and I love their kayaks, but you know, the Hobie fills a niche for me that I don't do a lot. But when I do have to do that, it does a great job at that. So I have a big tournament coming up in a few weeks where I will be taking both the Shoalie and the Hobie, and I think the CK2 will probably be kind of in the back burner for a while. I think when we do some camping trips this year, you'll see me out in that one. In fact, I have a tandem float coming up this week that will be taking both the Shoalie and the CK2 out. That'll probably be the last bit of adventure the CK2 gets for a while, but I did really want to touch on the motor thing at the start here because I do think it is a question that I get a ton. I have a full video on that, which I'm going to link down below, talking about kayak motors way more in depth. But I think 90% of you guys are buying the wrong kayak motor out of the gate because you think you need the power and you don't. I would say you're going to benefit more from the reliability, the ease of use, and just the overall versatility of something like the 180 than the 300. I think the 300 is a very specialized motor that when you need it, does the job phenomenally. But I think, like I said, most of you guys would love an NK180 Pro. It's gonna do the things that you want it to do. You're not gonna have to upgrade anything, out of the box, ready to go. Throw some foot steering on a kayak and you've got arguably one of the most versatile rigs. So hope you guys enjoyed this quick little video. I'll see you guys on the water.
Yeah, this is like a 20.